Hello again, I hope you're all okay. In my last video, I said a certain book needed a video of its own, so that is what I am doing. And that is Ninth House. There's just a lot about this book that I really liked and that needed more of a... It needed its own video. It didn't want to be crowded out by other books. So this book is about a girl called Alex who ends up in a really terrible place in her life and is sort of bailed out by a sort of organization that is a part of Yale, a secret organization. And the deal is they will get her out of trouble if she works for them, with the bonus being that she also gets a Yale education. The secret organization is the Ninth House, and their purpose is to keep an eye on the other 8 houses within Yale, who all have a sort of specialized magical, supernatural focus. And because this is Yale, a lot of them have connections to very powerful people or people who will be powerful. So there might be magic that how do I describe it? I'm trying to think what it does. It sort of blesses contracts between bankers or something. There's stuff like that, but then there's other magical things that are a lot less vague and very very serious, and kind of scary. So the book is kind of split in 2 halves. There is a main through line set in... Gotta get this right. It's set in winter. I don't know why it is winter. I don't need to do that. It's set in winter. And that's the main plot line where Alex discovers that there's been a murder, but the police there's one policeman who knows about Ninth House and the other houses. He doesn't really know too much. He's their sort of go-between. He doesn't want to know, but when he feels like something crazy is happening, he can pass it on to them. But this murder takes place, and he just says, "Look, this is our deal. There's nothing special about it. Don't worry about it. Just go home." But she can't kind of let this go because she sort of gets a feeling like there actually is a connection, and so that's the main through line of the book, is figuring out why this girl was killed. And then the other sort of... It's not quite half of the book, but there is also a series of flashbacks set a couple of months earlier in the autumn. But these are told from the point of view of Darlington, who was her mentor, who taught her some of the jobs that Ninth House do. Ninth House is pretty small. It's essentially just like a few people. So those 2 were the main people dealing with stuff. And then there's Dawes, who sort of... she sort of looks after their hub, I guess. Keeps medicine stocked up and things like that. And then they have a head of the department. But he's like your typical CEO type. You're like, he doesn't actually do anything. And sort of... But he kind of calls the shots. So these flashbacks kind of just show her time when she's just joined Ninth House. But they're all told through the point of view of this other character. So it kind of takes a little bit of time to actually go back further into what brought Alex here. So I don't really want to go too much more into the plot itself. So I'm going to talk about different aspects of the books, and the first one is Alex herself. So before I talk about Alex, I kind of want to explain that I am someone who was. I had a very. In case you can't tell from the fabulous painting behind me, uh, the my I have a very privileged background. I was pretty protected from a lot of things, and maybe it went too far the other way. But I grew up terrified of the idea of taking drugs. It frightened the hell out of me. So with that kind of, thankfully, I'm a little bit. It freaks me out less now. Not that I take drugs, but I try to be less judgmental. But with that being my background, I do find that I can struggle to not empathize, but kind of understand characters who come from that sort of background. But this is where Leigh Bardugo really shines with her writing, because she uses the supernatural and magic to. This is going to sound really bad, but it sort of makes a nerd like me completely understand how a character like this ends up with her situation. So since she's been young, she's been able to see ghosts, and this has been kind of a terrifying thing for her, and because they look like how they were at the moment when they died, so they could have like messed up faces, and obviously the fact that no one else can see them means that she leads quite a horrible, lonely life. And again, really trying to not spoil too much. There's an event that happens with a ghost when she is very young, but it's not a. The thing that happens is sort of like a cross between horror and a very real world scenario that could happen to someone. It involves like really horrible abuse, and this, and what makes it worse is that this abusive event that happened to her, she can't explain to other people what it was, because hey, ghosts were at fault and no one else can see these things. So something really horrible happens to her, and everyone sort of gets it, but they don't understand. So they know something's happened, but they think she's just hiding something from them, or she's not fully explaining it. So when this scene happens, you completely get everything about her is explained. Everything about her makes sense. And when she gets a year or two older, she ends up with a group of older kids, and they have weed or something. And she finds that when she starts taking drugs, suddenly she can't see the ghost anymore. And again, it makes total sense. If these things are freaking you the hell out and are really destroying your life, and you have a way to turn that off, even if it's something that regular people frown on, yeah, absolutely, that makes so much sense. So that's why I think this is what pushed the book to the next level. We're going to get onto something else as well, but it's the use of magic and supernatural, but it's got a real taste of realism to it. So you could almost like pull back the magic and replace it with real world scenarios, and it would still make sense. But I really appreciate this sort of like interwoven nature of these sort of like genres and ideas. And it just impressed me. So going back to me saying, hey, I can struggle to understand these characters. Everything just makes so much sense. It's absolutely fantastic, but it's also heartbreaking because you have this character with a really terrifying and really awful backstory at such a young age. And this is sort of like juxtaposed with her mentor, who didn't have a completely cheerful childhood, but it's on the surface level is like he's well off, he's rich, and he's never had, he's he's like me, he's never had to deal with drugs in his life, so I think he kind of has to check himself a couple times when he's like, oh, why, what are you scared of? Or why do you have, there's a moment early on where he's like, why are you wearing long sleeves? And she's just sort of like makes an offhanded remark like, oh, do you want to see my track marks? It turns out that's not the reason. She has a tattoo that she's hiding. But that sort of, he has a moment where it's like, oh, I guess that could be what you have under there. So he then doesn't want to push her anymore. But when this character arrives at Yale, she really wants to take the opportunity to use that education. Like, the supernatural side is the job that she has to do to be there. But she is using this opportunity as best as she can, because she knows it is the best opportunity she will have for a better life in the future. So she kind of reins in the sort of like rough edges of her nature. She sort of, at the start of the book, she's withdrawn into herself to be the most timid version of herself that she can be. And getting her to break out of that slowly as more and more shit happens to her through the book is really fantastic. And with that, I am then going to jump on to the next thing I want to talk about, which is Dawes. So Dawes, as I said, was the character who sort of stays behind. She sits at the hub and she's like Q, I guess, or or the secretary or whatever. So she's not really used to being out in the field, but for the main plot of the book, Darlington, the mentor character, is not present. This isn't a spoiler to say because it's mentioned very early on, but he is missing, but he's either missing or some people say he's gone to Spain. So it's quite unclear. He's basically not there, and we're not 100% sure why for a good chunk of the book. So Alex is left on her own to deal with all of this stuff. And all she has is Dawes, and at the start of the book, Dawes doesn't really like her that much. I guess she kind of begrudges her being around. She's not an Alex fan, but she's an introvert, I guess. She just wants to be left alone. And as well, there is this aspect of Darlington is everybody's favourite. He's the golden boy. And there's this idea that some people might be blaming Alex a little bit or begrudging her for surviving. So there's a little bit of that going on. So Dawes is potentially just a little bit mad at her or doesn't like that she's around and her and the golden boy isn't. So that's the starting point of their relationship. But what I absolutely love was the growth of their relationship over the course of the book as they become closer and open up around each other. And it gets to the point where Dawes suddenly has her back. So there's a point where Alex gets attacked by a supernatural creature. And she rushes to one of the Ninth House sort of like secret hideouts, because in there it's like magically protected, and she calls Dawes, asks her for help. She is dying when she is crawling into this hideout, and Dawes thankfully saves her life. So that is how much of a close call this was. And after this has happened, they get in touch with the head guy of Ninth House, and he comes to sort of debrief her on what's happened. But he sort of, he doesn't take it fully seriously, or he doesn't seem interested in finding out who has sent this creature to attack Alex. So I want to read out a bit. "Alex," he said gently, a faint scold in his voice. "We knew when you came here that someone of your abilities had never been in such a position. It's possible, likely even, that simply being here has disrupted systems we can only guess at." "You're saying I triggered the Gloomer attack?" She hated the defensive edge in her voice. "I'm not saying you did anything," said Sando mildly. "I'm just saying by dint of what you are, you may have brought this on." Dawes crossed her arms. "That sounds a lot like she was asking for it, Dean Sando." And he sort of is blistered by this and sort of just like, oh, that's not what I'm saying. And from that moment, one, I knew the lead Bardugo is not messing around, and two, this is the crucial moment where Dawes suddenly, I know she's just saved her life, but she has Alex's back, and that that line is just fantastic. And Alex is just the character that is just gonna go headfirst into trouble. And Dawes really doesn't want to, but she is going to help Alex begrudgingly. But yeah, seeing the relationship between them is so great because it's so rare in fantasy, especially, of seeing female friendships grow like this. So that was just like lovely to see. So the next thing is Darlington. Like I said, Darlington is the golden boy. He's well off. He's very good at what he does. But he's not too outrageously over the top that you can't empathize with him. He's immediately likable, and I think a lot of that is because of how he treats Alex. There's a event early on where she has to help with a job, and he's like, "It's straightforward, don't worry about it." So remember, she's been able to see ghosts this whole time, or greys as they're called. And he keeps telling her, "Don't worry, we're just like keeping them back with the spell to protect these people protect one of the houses while they do their thing." And, he reassures her. But something goes wrong, and she freaks out. And at first, the empathy isn't there. There's this sort of blame of, why, this went wrong, and it nearly ended terribly. Why didn't you just, hold the line? And then she flips it, and she says, no, something happened to me. And again, I'm trying not to spoil it. She says, they did something. And he says, they can't do that. And she's like, yes, they can, because they can do it to her because of what she is. And so he then realizes that he has to take a step back and reassess, and he realizes that he's been way too harsh, and that actually she is in more danger than he is doing these things. And from there, she becomes really upset and sort of starts to break down, because she asks the question of, if there were these spells and these ways to get rid of these ghosts and keep them back, why did no one come to her rescue and tell her how to use these years ago? Maybe she would not have been in the situation she was. Maybe she wouldn't have gone to drugs. Maybe she wouldn't have been harmed and hurt and abused in the way that she was. And very quickly, Darlington gets that, and he lets her unleash her anger about the situation. He lets her throw plates, go crazy. He is not getting in the way of her having a cathartic, angry moment. So from there, you see that Darlington, he does care, and that's sort of enough, but just enough for me to like this character. But there is also a little bit of a sad backstory to him as well. I won't go too much into it. It's nowhere near as bad as Alex's, but it's kind of sad. And so Darlington is a weird character in that, not so much because of who he is, but because of how Leigh Bardugo puts him in the story. Because like I said, for the main plot, for the main timeline, he's not there. It's very strange to go back and feel close to this character, knowing that he's not around anymore. I really can't say anymore without spoiling. But yeah, it's very weird to have a character that you really like who's not there. It's very odd. But I really liked the way the plot was structured like this. And the way that these flashbacks were dropped in. Yeah, it was really great character development. And the last part is the houses. So, these houses, like I said, they all focus on different areas of magic. Like, some are kind of create weird illusions. But they're all basically like Yale frat houses. Or sorority. I don't know. I'm not American, but I get the term frat house. And Yale is a incredibly privileged, Yale is full of very privileged people. And these houses are occupied by these privileged people. And that's sort of made worse by the fact that so many of them have access to this magic. There's something that comes up that is basically a drug or a magical potion where you give it to someone and then they suddenly want to devote themselves to you. Whether that is by doting on you with praise, but it's basically a drug to get someone to do whatever the hell you want with them. And Leigh Bardugo is not afraid to go to the darker implications of what this could be. But again, keeping it on brand with it's, no one's using this to get someone to go on a crazy murder spree with like zombies and shit. It's like if a regular frat boy had access to this, what would they very likely use it for? If you don't want to be spoiled, skip ahead 10 seconds or or just close your ears for when I whisper, but it's basically a date rape drug. Yeah. So again, it's the magic being interwoven with a cultural, societal issue that is very real. And seeing that play out is fascinating, but it helps that there's a character who will not take that at all and is willing to go help the person, or at least seek some sort of revenge for this horrible thing happening. So the book will look at magic and privilege and look at the different aspects. You know, it comes up a few times of how people would just like happily use this, not worrying about the consequences. And it's just great. No, that sounds terrible. It's not great. It's a terrible thing, but that's good writing. I hope you liked my little discussion of Ninth House. I really recommend it. It's such a good example of what modern fantasy can be. I sort of read a lot less in the last couple of years, the last 6 months excluded, and my reading pace slowed down. As you get older and stuff happens in your life, it's quite natural. But I really feel now, finding books like this being recommended by YouTubers, I really feel like I've missed out on a shift in fantasy. There's clearly writers that don't want modern fantasy to just be vampires and werewolves. They want to do something interesting with having magical elements in the modern world, which, there was a couple of those books. One of my favourites, Rivers of London, was already doing that, and was doing a really great job at it. But it was kind of rare, and I think especially outside the UK, it's not massively known. I still don't see it referenced by anyone else in, like, the fantasy Reddit. So, it's nice that we're getting books like Ninth House showing what modern fantasy can be, which is really exciting. Because if you didn't know, I wrote a book that's modern fantasy. So shout out for my genre. Hope you enjoyed this video and enjoy the rest of your day.